Preserving the planet. The Micro Effect.
www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand that pulls the string. It makes his little puppets dance to every song he sings as the night goes in on a rising tide. Look beyond the shadows, behold a pale horse.
Well, good morning. It is Tuesday, and it is March 19th, and we are having another great morning here in southern Arizona, and we are enjoying a terrific, let's call it an early summer here. It's spring here, and I came down from Montana about a week and a half ago, and boy, what a difference in the amount of cold weather between there and here. It was 28 below just a few days before I left, and I think it was somewhere around 10 degrees or 8 degrees, something like that when I left Montana, and I came down here, and today it's supposed to be 81, so we're really enjoying this warm weather. Today I have a really, really fun program lined up. I have a gentleman by the name of George Kaler, who is really a fun man, a funny man. He's written a great book called Surviving Georgie, but he likes to look at the bright side of life, and he brings humor into the debate over all the issues that we are seeing in our country on private property, on all the let's say the far left hateful rhetoric that we see, and he brings humor to it, and he brings a really funny story about his childhood, and I laughed so hard when I looked at that, because I saw that Georgie and I had a very similar childhood in many ways. Some of the stuff that he did was exactly the same kind of stuff that I did. And God bless an America that was free at that time, when kids could actually have fun, and parents could actually be parents without destroying one another. I also have a really good friend by the name of Patrick Matriciano, and Pat is a film producer. He's got a film company called Jeremiah Films, and Pat is really involved with Freedom Films. He is the gentleman who made the Clinton Chronicles, and that movie that kind of exposed what the Clintons were all about. It's been around for a while, and I think probably a lot of our listeners and an awful lot of people worldwide have seen that film. So With that, George, welcome to the show. I just really enjoyed our conversation yesterday. It was pretty obvious to me that we had very similar childhoods. You grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and I grew up in rural southwest Montana. And, boy, life was sure a lot easier in those days, wasn't it?
It's an honor to speak with you this morning. And, yeah, we did have similar childhoods. We both lived in a very politically incorrect and innocent time in America's history. Yeah, it was. It was a time when people could be people, and we weren't so afraid of intruding on somebody else's feelings and all that. I mean, we had the freedom to actually be free in those days. And we're going to talk about today about how we can use humor and really use the opposition's, I don't know, I'd call it a nasty attitude to expose them for what they are, and use our sense of humor and our, I guess I would call it humanness, to sell younger people on the idea of freedom, because we've lost a lot of that freedom, and a lot of those concepts have been pushed under the rug by the loony left, and I think it's time to use the kind of humor and the kind of things that you do to bring that back to life. So, George, I really look forward to this. Tell our listeners a little bit about your book, Surviving Georgie. It takes place in 1949 to 1956 outside Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, and it was in Pennsylvania Dutch country. In fact, our farm now is the only non-Amish farm around. After Daddy died at age 100 2 years ago, the Amish bought most of the farm, but I kept a small portion of it. It's called the Big Hill. There's a lot about it in the book. The Big Hill, highest hill in 6 counties, and it was such an innocent time. It was a small community. We had a one-room school. We had a Methodist church. We had Grange, where my mother and father met at a Grange dance. And I promised my dad, by the way, I wrote the book probably 15 or so years ago, but he thought it would be a big bestseller, and he asked if I would just hold off publishing until after he was no longer on Earth. Well, he lived to be over 100. And so I didn't want to hurry that up because I still miss the man all the time. But I decided after he passed away, well, it's time to publish now. It got rave reviews from people at Focus on the Family, Liberty University, and oddly enough, Saturday Night Live is one of the funniest books ever written. So I hope people, that's the main email and fan mail that I'm getting, that it is the funniest book they've ever read.
Well, you know, growing up in rural America was such a wonderful experience, and the times that we lived in, George, I think it couldn't have been really more ideal for a young person. And I laugh about your tying a bunch of chickens up trying to get them to pull your wagon. I think I told you the story about I got a brand new wagon when I was about 5 years old, and I thought it'd be real fun to have one of our dairy cows pull it. And so I got a noose and tied it to the wagon, the tongue of the wagon, and then got up behind the dairy cow. Of course, dairy cows are not very wild. They're used to kids being around and stuff, so it wasn't too big a deal. But I got that noose around that cow's tail. And as soon as that cow started feeling like there was something back there, she dragged me clear across the field, and I mean, it was going upside down, and my new wagon turned into a very old wagon real fast. It drug all the hide off of me, and my dad finally caught up with the dairy cow clear on the other side of the place. It had gone over a couple of ditches, and my wagon looked pretty crappy by then. And incidentally, if anybody that's ever been around cattle, when you put something hanging on their tail, and when they get afraid, they have a tendency to, well, let's just say, relieve themselves. And so not only was I covered with scratches and upside down and torn to pieces from the ride, I was also covered with excrement. My dad, I think he would have punished me, except when he took a look at me and how pathetic I looked. He just took me back to the house and had my mom try to bandage me up and get me back in some kind of shape. So your story about the chickens, that is such a funny story. George, we've got to make humor a much more important part of our whole process. Tell our listeners some of the things that you've been involved in. You've been on some terrific talk shows. I know you've been on Limbaugh, you've been on Hannity, you've been on a number of great talk shows. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've been involved in.
Well, the problem is with Hannity or Rush Limbaugh or Laura Ingraham and you, I'm kind of preaching to the choir, because your audiences are already people who love America. They love our founders and the Constitution. They love our Judeo-Christian culture and how it's no longer here the way it was, but the echoes of it are still resounding in our culture, that it's made life so much better for us. So I've only been, I think, preaching to the choir. What I'm hoping to do with that book, Surviving Georgie, is that I read it for people 60 and over, so they, like you and me, so they could reminisce about the good times and have a few laughs. But what shocked me is my main audience has been kids under 10 years old. And the main mail I've been getting from them is, were things really like that? Why aren't things like that now? And I was just thinking, why aren't they like that now? You know, we've let it go. So I was one of the founders of the Tea Party. I got fed up with the cowardice of the GOP, that they had just really left behind their original mission, following the Constitution, being strong in reducing taxes, reducing spending, and so on, making government smaller. And I was really fed up with the Democrats. And I was thinking it's a terrible thing to be defended by cowards and being attacked by people that are almost bordering treason. And so that's the reason for the Tea Party. Well, when we started it, Obama didn't like us at all. And we started it right after he came into office. In fact, I gave my first Tea Party speech to about 15,000 people here in Virginia on April the 15th, 2009. And that was, of course, tax day. And so we symbolically threw tea leaves into the James River here in Virginia, and that was the foundation of the Tea Party. Well, the IRS came down on us, and what I didn't know, Lois Lerner, especially, Obama weaponized the IRS to put a stop to conservative groups like ours, the Tea Party, and Christian groups as well. One of my Christian groups that works in Africa, what we do, we rescue kids that have been kidnapped by terrorists and turned into children soldiers. And it's just a horrific thing. Well, when we tried to get our 501c3 for that, even that was held up for over a year. And our Tea Party members were getting audited and harassed, and pretty much a stop was put to that. We're still getting some harassment. But the Tea Party, we thought it would really cleanse and strengthen the Republican Party. We're a movement, not a party itself. But what our movement was to try to get the Republicans to act right. And now we have President Trump, and we're happy about that, but we're very unhappy about the lack of support that he's getting from his own party. I mean, the Democrats couldn't do one of the things they've been up to if the Republicans had just held strong, especially when they had the majority. It was just awful what they tried to do. So anyway, we're trying to clean up the party, trying to win the culture back to our constitutional republic, our Judeo-Christian culture, and it's really been a struggle. Also, the fun part's done. It's easy to go to a rally and like Trump's rallies and so on, just easy to go and just have a good time with other like-minded people. But when it comes down to the hard work, like knocking on doors, passing out campaign literature, making phone calls, contributing your hard-earned money to a candidate of your choice, well, the Tea Party discovered that a lot of the earlier support fell away. So now we're still successful, we're still very energetic, but it's not as big as it used to be.
Well, George, you talked about the April 15th rally that you did, and we did one up in Montana. I'm sure you probably know Henry Kriegel. Henry was the guy that started the Montana Tea Party with several other people.
Yeah, good man.
We had a rally up in Bozeman, Montana, which is it's not a huge town. It's, I think, all told about 40,000 or so, including the university. But we had a Tea Party rally that extended for about 8 blocks, and I had a total of somewhere around 3,000 people show up on April 2009, and that was, as a matter of fact, I was one of the speakers at that, and it was a blast, and it showed that people were sick and tired of the establishment, and that they were ready for something new, and that was exactly what the Tea Party was all about, getting back to our roots and creating a return, let's say, to a constitutional Republican form of government. And apparently a lot of the Republicans haven't heard that message yet.
Some of them haven't even read the Constitution. I've had occasion to visit with a good many Republican members of the House, and I've talked to at least 3 that have never read the Constitution the whole way through.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I ran for the state chair of the Republican Party in Montana a few years back, and I had overwhelming support from the county central committees. But one of my things that I said is that we are going to, anybody that runs as a Republican and wins is going to have to go through a constitutional training, and we will provide all the information, but we will require that they go through a training to understand what the Constitution is all about. And it was really funny because they changed the rules 5 minutes before the vote on the chairman, and when they changed that rule, it was funny because all the people who were legislators who also have a vote, overwhelmingly they voted against me. I ended up losing by 14 votes because of that last-minute rule change, and they did it to make sure that I didn't get in, because they didn't want to have to be learning something as silly as the Constitution.
You know, what gets me, it's like, have you ever gotten, like from Radio Shack or before that, Allied Radio Shack, you get a kit, and it has a list of instructions on how to make the thing work. Whether it was a radio, I used to enjoy doing this as a kid, getting a kit, soldering it all together, and you would have something that worked, and it would work for a long time. And our country came with an instruction manual, just like that, on how to make this thing work. And it seems silly, but we've forgotten our instruction manual, our compass. We just left it behind, and we're sort of going on this, blind reckoning, and it's not working. And we can see why it's not working. We're 22 trillion in debt, and that doesn't even include all the unfunded mandates of Social Security, Medicare, and so on, government pensions. It's probably closer to 90 trillion, which equals the value of every house, every company, every bank account, and so on in America. We're in debt beyond the value of our country because we just weren't following the Constitution.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and you talk about the unfunded liabilities and the amount of debt that we've got. I mean, there are a lot of people that place that number close to $150 trillion in unfunded and the $22 trillion immediate deficit that we have. But the reason that we build up that deficit is we've destroyed our monetary system with a cheap money policy, and government has been in collusion with the mega bankers, with the privately owned Federal Reserve System, and what they've done is they've allowed us to push off all these debts to future generations, and same time to spend money we don't have on programs we don't need, and they've been buying out the public, and that's how they've gotten in the position where they continue to get reelected, because they bring home the pork. And the fact is the young people are the ones that are going to end up facing this mountain of debt, and it's literally impossible to pay that debt off. And one of the things that I think we have as older Americans, I'm 68, I think, George, you're 75, we have the grandfather effect. And it's funny because kids will listen to their grandparents, but they won't listen to their parents. So we're in that unique position as older Americans where all of a sudden we can get an audience with the younger people and actually be heard.
I was invited to speak at a couple of school assemblies on what the Tea Party was about, and I said to it was a high school, about 300 kids or so in the assembly. And I said, how many of you have credit cards? Well, only a couple of hands went up. I was kind of surprised to see anybody did. I said, would you like credit cards? And then every hand went up. I said, what if your parents took your credit card and they went to Europe, but they didn't take you along? And you got postcards, however, we're having a great time, and you get sights of what they've seen and so on. And then you get another postcard that says, we're going to stay another year. We really enjoy it here. And they come back, and you discover they have put about $60,000 on your credit card that you have to pay off. You didn't authorize those debts. You did not approve them, but you're the one who's going to have to pay them off. And you'll say, Mother, Dad, this is unfair. And they say, but son, daughter, we voted on this, and we both voted to do this. And so this is legal, and you're going to have to pay it off. And the kids were ready to pick up torches and pitchforks once they understood just what we've done to them, that their credit card already has about $60,000 per kid that they're going to have to pay off. Actually, as you just said, it may be a lot higher than that.
Yeah, and boy, that's a perfect way to present that to the young people when they realize that there is no such thing as free money, and that there is ultimately a debt to be paid off. It's just a matter of how it gets paid, and that's a great way to do it, George. I really applaud your whole approach to life. You're doing a terrific job with this. We've got a recording of a soundtrack. Someone made up a soundtrack about your sister cooking bird spaghetti. I think it would be fun to play that right now to show some of the humor of some of the things that you've been working with. So, Joe, I know you've got that up and ready to play. Let's hear it now.
Mother was too busy with her books to cook the family meal one night. Sister made spaghetti crisp. What an awful smell and an awful sight. Daddy tried to eat that blackened mess, but he gave up halfway through. Said, I don't know what in the Sam Hill this is supposed to be, but a box of Kellogg's cornflakes will have to do. What in the Sam Hill's happening here tonight? My dinner's burned, the smell is awful bad. I try to hold in my nose to get rid of the odor, but the charcoal texture's about to make me gag. Oh no, it's gonna make me gag. Gonna make me gag. I feel like I wanna gag.
Now that's boy, I tell you, we've all had that kind of an experience, being cooked by our siblings or ourselves, and it's a really cute song. George, I want to get Pat Matriciana back on this call as well. Pat, are you on right now? And if you are, I'd love to welcome you to the show as well.
Well, it's an honor to be here, but I'm getting a little sick thinking about eating that burnt spaghetti.
Yeah, we've all had that little fun experience or something real similar.
Oh yeah,
Pat, you've been doing just really a terrific job of providing films on, well, the Clinton Chronicles are certainly one, but other short clips that you're doing to just kind of inform average Americans of the mess that we're in. And you're the one that introduced me to George, and I really think it's important that people realize just exactly the sort of message that you've been bringing to America as well. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to maybe tell people a little bit more about Jeremiah Films and some of the things that you've been involved in.
Well, I'd love to, but the first thing I'd like to say is that the thing that hooked me on George was his book. And, I mean, I've never seen a book like that. And one of the reasons that I'm with George now is he was 2.5 years old, but he could talk and he could understand things, and that's my grandson. And I read a story out of Surviving Georgie to my little 2.5-year-old grandson, and he got addicted to it. And he's now 3, and he speaks a lot better, and he understands better. So every time I see my grandson, I've got to read him Georgie. Now, he has a little brother that's a lot younger. He's not 2 yet, and he likes to look at some of the pictures and all of that. And I found it incredible because I've never seen a book that actually ministers to so many people. And before I talk about Jeremiah Films, would it be okay if I asked if George told a story, one more story, which is, I think, incredible, about one of his band members and what happened before he passed away?
Oh, absolutely. We will be coming up on a break here shortly, so when you hear the music, we'll just break at that point, and then we'll pick it up on the other side. But yes, please do.
Be good. Yeah. So anyway, go ahead. Anyway, George, I guess you're going to be telling that story at the end of when the break comes up. Is that right?
At the end of the break, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, Jeremiah Films. I got involved in filmmaking a long time ago, and the reason...
Yeah, Pat, I hear the music, so we're going to go into break. We'll pick up on the other side of the break.
Okay, thank you so much.
This is The Micro Effect. The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Apple, and today we've got two very, very special gentlemen on our radio program. We've got George Kaler, who has written an extremely funny and interesting book called Surviving Georgie, and we also have Patrick Matriciana, who is a film producer and has a company called Jeremiah Films, and has done a number of really good exposés on what's really happening in America. So with that, Patrick, I'd like to come back, and you were starting to talk about Jeremiah Films. Go ahead and do that, and then we'll get George's story too.
Oh, that'd be great. Okay. Anyway, I just want to say again, thank you so much for having me on your show, because I've known you for a while, and I've always really admired you, because you're one of the very few people that knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. and so I go to you for my sources and a lot of things. Anyway, I was in Berkeley in the late 60s and early 70s, Berkeley, California, and I was on the campus, and I was able to see firsthand what the radical left was doing. And I wasn't there as a student. I was there actually as a campus minister. But what I saw was so revealing that it changed my whole worldview. Now, I've been to probably 500 communist meetings. I've had many threats in my life. I've seen the radical left in operation. And while I was there, we formed our own group. And it was actually we were what you might call the beginnings of the Jesus movement in Berkeley. And so we saw a spiritual side to all of this. We saw, obviously, the satanic influence, but we also saw the awesome power of God to work not only in the lives of the college students, but we also saw many radicals converted to Christianity in a true sense. That's Black Panthers, that's gang members, Gypsy Jokers, Hell's Angels, and all kinds of things. So we knew that if you're going to be a real revolutionary, you couldn't be a real revolutionary unless you were a Christian, because the power that the communists have is a kind of a secular humanist satanic power, but we all know that God is greater than man. So that was my basis for being there. Now, that didn't mean that we weren't bold and strong in what we did, and that didn't mean that we weren't persecuted and all of that. But what I saw in Berkeley was really, really amazing. I saw, I'm not going to call it the beginnings of the progressive movement, because it was already well on its way in the late 60s. What I saw was how they would take a cause that was popular, and then they would take it over. And I saw how they were extremely active in the world of education. That was one of the goals. They wanted to, basically influence the school system. And in the 60s, there were a lot of bad college professors that were progressives, were communists, really, literally communists. So I saw them operating, and we would go to the meetings, and we would listen to what they had to say, and then we would also speak, and sometimes we had to be rather forceful in what we said. But what I'm seeing today is an extension of what we saw in the late 60s. For example, I'll give you one quick story, and that is when we first formed the organization, and the name of the flagship of our organization was the Christian World Liberation Front. Now we gave it kind of a communist name to be able to relate to those types of people. And I went into the dean's office to get my organization as an official campus organization. Now, I had done all my homework, and I I had 3 students because it had to be a student organization, but they knew that I was the one that was behind this. And the dean, who actually was a former professor in biblical studies. He was a former seminary professor, but he was a liberal, and he went to Berkeley, and he was the dean of students at Berkeley. And he says, "I know who you are," and he said to me, "You know that if you become an organization, it's against college rules to talk about Christianity." And I don't know what hit me, but something hit me that wasn't right. And so I took my fist, and I'm not saying I would do this, and this is what you should do. I took my fist and slammed it on his desk and said to him, "Every day I hear communist students calling for the violent overthrow of our government. You have blood drives for the Viet Cong. You allow these people to say whatever they want on campus, and you're telling me that I can't talk about the only real solution, which is Christianity." And I said, "How dare you? You who were a seminary professor, how dare you say that to me?" And you know, the thing that happened out of that is he became one of my closest friends. And we began to work very closely with the University of California, with the dean that was there. And we also discovered that there were other people that started coming into our meetings, and our meetings became really big. In fact, we could mobilize 1,000 students probably within a few hours. So we became very, very active in that thing. And the reason I'm saying this is that what we lack today in America, in our churches, is any kind of boldness. And the thing that scares me more than anything is the lack of concern for the state that our country is in right now, because America is in the worst state that you can possibly imagine. We're far worse than we were in Berkeley, and it looked like in Berkeley things were very, very bad then, but they're much worse now because these same radicals have gotten involved in politics. See, that was their whole thing was to get involved in government, and they did. They got involved in government, get involved in media, and they did. And so what we're looking at today is a radical group. They call themselves progressives, but really they're a form of communism. And when I talk to people that are communists today, and I go to Berkeley frequently. I've been up there probably 5 times this last year. And so I meet with the students and I talk to people and I see what's going on and so on and so forth. And when I talk to the communists, they say, well, look, yeah, Stalin had some good ideas and Castro had some good ideas and all that, but they don't have the same kind of communism that we have. They always say our form of communism is going to be better than the last form. And it's just ridiculous. The progressives who call themselves socialists and radicals and all kinds of things are involved in literally destroying our government, because the whole thing is we've got to destroy the government we've got, and we've got to bring in another system of government similar to that of Cuba or China. And that's what they said then. Today they're saying, no, we don't want to bring in a form of government similar to that of Cuba or China. What we want to do is we want to bring in a socialism that's more like European socialism, which is nonsense. It's a very scary thing, and it's absolutely essential that we, particularly the older generations that have experienced some of this, be the lights, shine our light to the younger generation, because they're buying this stuff. I mean, if you took a sample of college kids and you gave them a survey and asked them, would they rather live under socialism or the free enterprise system, they would all say, not all, but a very large percentage of them would want to be socialist. And we know that socialism is a bankrupt philosophy. So that's kind of my little Berkeley background. So I'll be quiet.
No, you actually, Patrick, one of the things that's nice is that you're so sincere and you're so clear in saying things that make sense to average Americans. And I have to say that your comment about how they've taken over government, they've gotten involved, they've gotten elected to government offices, but they have also, and this is the part that's kind of scary, they've taken over the so-called green movement. We refer to them as watermelons, green on the outside and red in the middle. But this so-called climate change, it used to be global warming, but now it's climate change, and the green movement is really, really controlled by the radical left and by the communists. And between that and the political class who have been taken over with this progressive politics, we're in serious shape in this country. You're right. We've never been closer to the destruction of our constitutional republic, I believe, than we are today. And that would include the American Civil War, which everybody claims was, really, really close to that point. Not even a fraction as much as we see today. George, I want to give you the opportunity to tell your story, because I know part of this is that you bring the kind of fatherly or grandfatherly humor and some of the practical, let's say, approach to young people into this. And I like to do the same, but you're a master at it. I want to hear some of your stories.
Well, I remember, in fact, I've been asked, and I think you have the same ability I have. I've been asked, how do you remember with such clarity before you were even in school, back when you were 4 and 5 years old? How do you remember all that? Well, the truth is you can remember what you did then maybe easier than what you had for breakfast this morning. I mean, when you get to my age. But I remember what people said. I remember what happened. I remember the way people looked when they said something to me. Usually they look scared as hell, and but wondering what I was going to do next. But when I can put myself into the place of a little kid really easily, and in the book Surviving Georgie, that's what I do. You'll be reading it through the eyes in present tense of the little kid who did all these things. By the way, every story is 100% true. Every person is real. Well, I'll probably need police protection when I go back home, and because of that. But Pat was asking me to tell a quick story. The leader of our band, and the band that we just heard is my band now. It's a cafe band. I used to tour with Motown, and the rock and roll touring days are pretty well over, but I can't seem to get the music to stop, so I still play. But the leader of the band was dying of cancer, and his wife called me and said, George, would you give the manuscript of the book to Mark? He's heard of some of the stories and he wants the book, but he knows that by the time it's published, he won't be here anymore. So I printed off the whole manuscript and gave it to him. And she called me about a day later and she said, George, Mark is in his bedroom in the very process of dying, and he's laughing his butt off. He's forgotten the pain, and he's laughing, hilariously laughing in there. I've gotten several more stories like that. One was from Texas. My dad has Alzheimer's. He hasn't spoken in 3 years, but as I read him stories from Surviving Georgie, he started laughing loudly. It was like there was an area of his brain that had not been destroyed by the Alzheimer's, and he was thoroughly enjoying the story. And those kind of stories really make my day to hear things like that. Not just fan letters, but where it's really made a difference.
Well, the things that you talk about are things that Americans can relate to. And, the young people are the ones that we need to be able to reach, because it shows a time in our country when life was easy, things were freer, had less political correctness and this sort of stuff?
We were totally politically incorrect. And that's the way we liked it. There's one story in the book about the chimpanzee that came to town. And back then, the carnival sometimes had a chimpanzee, and if you wrestled it,
Did we lose it?
Yeah, I think we might have lost George. I'll try to text him to make sure he gets back on.
Anyway, that chimpanzee story. Is George back yet?
It sounds like we're back. So go ahead.
I think we've lost George.
Okay. Well, we lost George, but we'll find George. Pat, go ahead and I really appreciated meeting you. It's been a number of years now, but I met you at the American Lands Council meeting in Salt Lake City, and you were doing a film at that time to talk about how the wolf and various elements that were being used to take away property rights and how important it was to protect private property. I believe you had interviews up in Alaska and all over. Talk a little bit about some of the films that you've been working on.
Well, recently I've been working on lots of mini films. As a matter of fact, I have a film called Liberty Up Front that is basically made up of 10 segments. And in the segments, I deal with all kinds of different issues. And it's available free, through World Media Ministry is the name of the group that is producing it. But all of this can be, located through jeremiahfilms.com. But anyway, we deal with 10 separate issues. Now, the issue that you were talking about is a film that we made then, and I'm going to be tweaking it a little bit. We're going to be making it a little bit more current, and so I'm going to be talking to you about changes that we need to make in it. So I'm going to be getting it to you in the very near future, because it really shows how the government uses everything that they can to basically confiscate our property, and of course, you're such an expert on that I would feel like a novice even telling you about it. But because what I have in the film is what I learned in many ways from, obviously from my friends in Alaska, and one of my very closest friends is a senator from the state of Alaska, and he, as many Alaskans, feel very strongly about the state of Alaska being, pretty much confiscated by the federal government. And I'm going to ask you a question. And this is, I'm sure you know the answer, but how much of Alaska, of the entire state of Alaska, would be owned by private business or individuals? I'm talking about businesses that own property or privately held property by individuals. How much of the state? I'm not including the Indian rights or any of the other, or the state-owned property or the federal-owned property. I'm talking only about the individuals. How much of the state of Alaska would you say would be actually owned just by individuals and the businesses?
Well, I know it's not very much in Alaska. I would guess if I. And I should know this number, but I would guess that it's right at around 20%, maybe 15%.
Well, let me tell you, it's less than 0.5%. It's 0.4%.
Really?
Yes. That's how much. And guess what they're doing? Guess what they're doing in Alaska? I mean, not so much now, but what they're doing now is they're actually buying private land. They're doing it. So from the individuals, and they're using them they're putting them in all kinds of different trusts and things, because that is one of the things that the federal government is doing, basically to grab more and more and more. So it's pandemic. Now, if I was to ask you what that percentage was in Montana, it's going to be pretty small too, but it's not going to be that small. So really, the land grab that we have is a grab that's thought through, and it's the people that would like to get rid of private property. Private property rights are one of the things that separate us from the rest of the world. Think about the private property rights that the Russians had under the in the Soviet Union, or the Chinese have. How much property rights do they have? It's all owned by the government, and that's what socialism in the United States wants to do. They want to actually, literally, own the country, and we would be the pawns in the country, and the elite, of course, would run it. And the elite knows best, and of course, the elite doesn't play by the rules. Do you think the Clintons play by the rules?
Right. In fact, we did a radio show about that called "The Rules or the Laws Are for the Little People," and the reality is that the political class live by a totally separate set of rules than they make the rest of us live by. Patrick, you're right about that land grab. It's happening in Montana and literally all over the United States, but especially in the West, because we've got large tracts of kind of open land. And one of the things, and of course that was why you were at the American Lands Council meeting as well as myself, is to talk about that and the return of those lands to the state, because the reality is the states are the ones that should control the land within their boundaries. If they don't, they shouldn't be a state. It's just that simple. But George, are you back on the call?
Well, I'm on a different. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you great now. We'll leave that discussion about private property. I want to give you the opportunity before we go to another break to tell your story about the chimpanzee.
Well, it came through our town and it beat up a couple of guys, and then our hired man got in. And I won't tell that story as much as I'll tell another story. I got a call from a guy in Virginia. And he called me and he said, "Are you George Kaler?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "You wrote a book called Surviving Georgie." I said, "Yes." "Is there a chimpanzee in the book?" I said, "Yes." He said, "The same chimp came through Lynchburg." I said, "Do you have any experience?" He said, "Oh, yeah. I put up signs all over Lynchburg, about 200 of them. Come see R.C. Ogden, the gorilla killer." Well, the chimp and the circus showed up, and I got in the cage, and the barker yelled, "Go." He said the first 5 seconds, it knocked me out. The next 5 seconds, it broke my foot, and I was off work 6 weeks. And then it crept in its hand and rubbed it in my face. I said, "That's the worst story I've ever heard." He said, "That was 65 years ago, and I'm still traumatized." But up to that time, he was the toughest guy in Virginia. In fact, I've talked to a couple of friends of his, and they said, yeah, he was the toughest guy in Virginia, but he never picked a fight again after that chimpanzee got through with him. Anyway, the story is in the book, and you'd never have a story like that again because PETA would not allow chimp wrestling today.
Oh, Lord, what a world we've messed up. You know, life used to be so much better in those days. Incidentally, I have to tell you, the little town, Belgrade, Montana, that I grew up in, we had a little farm west of town, but I went to this with my dad. They had a bear come to town that would wrestle with anybody that would get in the ring with it. And there was a black bear, and it did the same thing. It would take on all comers, and boy, it would take care of them really fast. It sounds like we're moving into a break, guys. Let's pick it up on the other side. This is fantastic. I really enjoyed this discussion.
Serving the planet. The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Mother was too busy with her books to cook the family meal one night. Sister made spaghetti and burned it to a crisp. What an awful smell and an awful sight. Daddy tried to eat that blackened mess, but he gave up halfway through. Said, I don't know what in the Sam Hill this is supposed to be, but a box of Kellogg's cornflakes will have to do. What in the Sam Hill's happening here tonight? My dinner's burned, the smell is awful bad. I try to hold in my nose to get rid of the odor, but the charcoal texture's about to make me gag. Oh no, it's gonna make me gag. Gonna make me gag. I feel like I wanna gag.
Great way to segue into the second hour. That is such a cute song. George, you were talking about the chimpanzee, and we were talking about some of the things that wouldn't happen today because of PETA and all these goofy, radical groups that want to criminalize virtually everything that's normal human behavior. That's the area that I want to talk about in the second hour. Is the fact these people are the most humorless, nasty-tempered. They see nothing funny in anything that isn't something they totally control, and that's where we need to make the difference. And I'm going to start this conversation with the suggestion that, Patrick, I think you need to get together with George and put together a great human interest program that is based on humor and pointing out just exactly how loony the loony left is and how important it is to maintain our sense of humor.
You know something? You're absolutely right. Because if you lose your sense of humor, you can't do anything, really. I mean, and these people have no humor. They don't. They, I mean, you know, the way I'm talking, you know, we have a battle we've got to fight, but we have to fight it not the way the enemy does, because we're different. We're absolutely different. And the Lord has given us, you know, He's made us humans, and humans have innate in them humor, and that's the wonderful thing. And one of the things that I have, you know, I've been to a lot of demonstrations over the years, you know, where people are rallying about this and rallying about that. And I want to give you, and I was at the feminist march. I was in the middle of the feminist march that took place in Washington D.C. I was also a part of the Right to Life march, and if you contrasted the two marches, if you were in both of them, you would find that the people in the Right to Life march were sweet and positive and uplifting and so on. You would find that the people in the feminist march were there was a hatred spirit that was there. It's just black and white. It's as clear as you can possibly make it. I will say this, that not all the people that are in the left are bad people. A lot of them, in fact, most people are deceived because we've been propagandized by not just the education system, but so much by the media. The media is so biased, and one of the things that the radicals have done for years is take over the media, and that's they've done very well with that. And I'll tell you that the salvation of our country, a lot of it is going to depend on talk radio, because this, you're free right now to be able to speak, and as long as you have that freedom, it's going to have an impact. And when I'm around you or other people, we enjoy ourselves. We have fun. It's a lot different. So we can't hate our enemy, but we also need to be very wise. And sometimes I have found that when they come up with these incredible arguments, and they have discussions all the time with people that are into the progressive movement, one aspect of it or another. And if you talk to them logically and let them see and realize what they're saying, sometimes I just break out in laughter. It's just so funny. And if you're laughing, sometimes it changes the whole temperature of the conversation. So I agree with you. We've got to do that, and that's one thing. This is another little story. This just happened a few days ago. A group of folks, about 50 of them, decided that they wanted to do a little demonstration for the wall, keeping the wall. It's a pro-Trump group. They're in that group were members of the Tea Party and so on and so forth. And they had this little demonstration, and they were on the street corner, and they had their American flags and all kinds of things that were good, and they would walk around and there was a happiness among them and a sweetness among them. And a lot of the cars would drive by and then honk and wave their hands and cheer them on, and that was good. But the bad guys would come by and give you the finger and start cussing you out and all this kind of stuff. And one guy, one car full of what I would call, they weren't. I've got to be politically correct here, but no, I won't. They were 4 African American kids, youngsters, in their 20s, drove by, and there was one older guy who was 31, 32 years old, and there were 3 kids, and these African American kids drive by. They're obviously a little leftist, and they start giving him the finger, and they take a can that's filled with water and bong, bad smelling stuff, and they throw it out the window, and they hit one of the guys on the head, right in the head, bang, and this thing splatters this foul smelling stuff all over everybody. And that's the actions that we're seeing. We have people that get aggressively nasty towards us. And of course, one of the things I am concerned about is the escalation of this and how we should respond to people like that. How we're going to see as we get out and as we let our voices be heard in a very peaceful way, in a very unobnoxious way, and waving and smiling and all of these things. When the enemy comes back at us, there's a big difference, because the progressives can be absolutely nasty and horrible. And so what we've got to do is we've got to learn how to respond, and how to respond in a very favorable way. And I do think that there needs to be a difference. They have to see a Christian love in us. But Christians don't roll over and get stomped on. You know, and Christians have the right before the Lord to operate in that realm, and Christianity is not a roll over and die religion. You know, so we've got to be strong and assert ourselves too. So there is that unusual balance that we've got to keep. I don't know if I'm making any sense out of it.
No, Patrick, I couldn't agree more with that, because I was going to mention the fact that almost all of these progressives and communists, I don't know any of them that are really Christian people. I mean, there may be, but I have my doubts, because in reality they believe in secular humanism, and that's the core of communism. And the difference between them and people like George, you and me and the other people in our country who have a sense of humor and realize that freedom is not free, is that we have a Christ-based existence. We realize that without the Lord we have absolutely nothing, because we understand that our rights come from God and they don't come from man, and that's the difference. They think that our rights come from man, and they think that somebody has to be in control of everyone, and we understand that natural law and natural rights are the rights that come from God.
Absolutely. I was at a meeting about maybe 10 days ago when I was at CPAC, and I was walking by this booth, and there's this young Asian girl sitting there, and there weren't any of the other people around, and she said, "Can I give you my presentation?" And basically, it's a youth movement. They're all young people that want to get their voices out. They're the group that hopefully are the ones that will be the next generation of activists in a good sense. And I said, sure. And she told me her little story, and I said to her, I said, look, I want to make sure that I understood what you're saying, and I'm going to tell you her story very quickly. Her story, and I said, look, am I getting this right? Did you say to me that when you were born in China, that because you were a girl and your parents didn't want you, they threw you in a garbage can? She said, yes, they threw me in a garbage can because I was a girl and they wanted boys. And somebody found you in that garbage can and took you to an orphanage. She said, that's right. That's what happened. And then an American came over, an American family, and adopted you when you were 5 years old. She says, yes. And she says, they raised me, and they cared for me. And I realized that actually what I had to do was I had to be thankful that I was brought from a socialist country that wanted to kill me because I was a girl, and they had the rights to do that, to this wonderful country. And she says, now I'm seeing the same things that happened in China happen in this country when they're passing laws that they can kill a baby that's born. And she said, I just can't believe it. She says, it's a terrible thing. And so that is what's happening. I mean, what we're doing with our children is, what we're doing with the unborn, of course, is such a horrible thing, killing the unborn babies. But the fact that these Democrats would not vote to save the life of a baby that was born alive, I mean, it's just unbelievable. This is the most incredible thing that I've ever seen. And so one of the things that I'm doing in terms of my smaller films is I'm doing that, and I'm doing things on the sanctity of life. And I have a film that I'm doing that I'm just finishing up. It's almost completed. We're adding the final touches to it. And it's a film that deals with George. And George, you know the one I'm talking about when you were playing with Motown? I would love it if you could tell that film from the surviving Georgie. This is an incredible story, and it's going to be in a film, and I'm going to get it to you as soon as it's finished, and hopefully it'll be finished the next few days. George, could you tell that story?
A groupie came to me. I was a touring rock and roll musician for a number of years, and nobody will believe this, but the touring rock and roll business isn't your best stable basis for morality. And anyway, we were just really wild and crazy people. But one of the groupies said, "George, I'm pregnant. I'm naming you." I said, "Why me?" She said, "Because I think it was you, and because I like you the best." I said, "Oh, Mary Kay, I'm not fit to be a husband, let alone a father. And quite frankly, I don't think you're fit to be a mother. I'll tell you what, I'll pay for all your care. Please don't have an abortion. I think you'll always regret this." And she told me where to go, and that was the end of that, except I got a letter from her attorney and how much I owed, which was pretty sacrificial. I was making good money that time, recording and touring. But I paid the fee, but I felt guilty for the next 40 years. Always wondering, was it a boy? Was it a girl? Was it mine? And about 40 years after this happened, I got an email one day. I was writing an article at the time called On the Right Side. It was a weekly take on Judeo-Christian cultures, a little bit like Tea Time, but more in depth because it was a long essay. Well, I got an email from Texas saying, "I read your column in Dallas, and I really like it, and you and I have a friend in common, Mary Kay." Well, it was like the computer opened up and the tsunami came out. It was like 40 years of wondering and this. And so I wrote back, "Please tell me all about yourself." Well, she wrote back, "First of all, thank you for paying for mother's care." She said, "I found you through the adoption service because I was having a problem with my pregnancy, and they thought it could be biological, and so I found my mother, and she told me that the father was named George. He had toured with Motown. He'd be about 58 years old at this time, and that he those three things." And she said, "Well, I just figured, I knew your name was George. A few weeks ago you said you were 58, and I knew you were with Motown, so I put it all together, figured it was you." And she said, "I want to thank you for paying for mother's care. Second, thank you for not having me killed." And it just hit me so hard. She was the only innocent person in this three-person problem. Well, she said, "I've lived a glorious life, and I have a great husband, great children, a great career, and I just want to thank you for all of that." Well, she became a member of my family. My mother and dad pretty much adopted her as another grandchild. She had 3 children. 2 of them were in medical school. They both graduated top of their class. My daughter, that I found 40 years later, is a doctor, and just the number of lives she saved, the number of lives her children were saved, the joy she brought to her adopted parents. And it reminded me of the story of Joseph when he said to his brothers, "Well, you meant this for evil, but God meant it for good." Well, I didn't mean it for anything. I was just a wild rock and roller. But what I didn't know was that God was working even then to bring about good out of my reckless life. And that's, to this day, she's very close to me. My grandchildren that I've discovered, really close to me. So it's been such a blessing.
You know, George, that's a terrific, a very touching story, and the important part about that is to understand that we're all human. We do things in our lives. I've done so many things in my life that I regret now, but that is the salvation story, is that we can travel through troubled waters, and as long as we ultimately come back to the truth that God, Jesus Christ, and I'm not trying to be preachy on this, but the reality is, part of the human experience is the fact that we aren't perfect, and the reason that we are the people we are is because of the many experiences that we've had, and if we're smart, we learn from those experiences, and if we're stupid, we use those experiences as excuses for a failed life. And so it's so important that we really understand that relationship, and that's part of the relationship that will bring humor and bring a lot of very personal things to the lives of the young people that I think we need to be touching.
But you got that straight. And, it's not just the aborted baby that's dead, but all the wonderful things that could have come about because of that life. That won't come about because that life was taken. And here in Virginia, something terrible happened. We have a governor who's been castigated by the press because he wore a Klan outfit and he was blackface and so on in college. But what they didn't talk much about was that he said after a baby's been born, if the mother didn't really appreciate its looks or health or anything, that the baby could be killed after the baby was born. Governor Ralph Northam actually said that. And there was a big uproar started up, and they brought out a straw man, and the straw man was finding these pictures of him in a Klan outfit and blackface. And all of that was to cover up his stance on life, how meaningless it must be.
Yes, and the other part of that, George, is that and I'm sorry to see this happen, that they want to blame white male Americans for virtually every bad thing there is, every aberrant behavior, everything that happens has got to be those awful white Christian middle class people. And we've got a war against white American males in this country that's unbelievable, and it's happened around the world. And it's time for people to wake up, because we need to protect the people who have made this world and this country and things as comfortable and modern as they have, and we need to protect Christians for sure.
When I was in college, I started off writing. I wrote a weekly story for the Pittsburgh Press on Shakespeare. I taught Shakespeare, and now he's just known as another dead white man. But when you discard a dead white man like Shakespeare because he was white, because he was a man, because he was a Christian, what are we going to do? Do away with the greatest works in literature? And it's the same with so many others. And there are also great black men and some non-Christians who have done things. By the way, one of the reasons I think that the Jews are really disliked by so many Muslims, do you know how many Jews have won the Nobel Prize in different fields? Roughly 250. Even though there are like 1/100% of the population of the world. And how many Muslims have won? 2. In fact, Yasser Arafat won one of them for the Peace Prize. And when he died, he had an estate of $2 billion, most of it in European real estate. when you think what that would have done for the Muslim population in Palestine, it would have made a difference. And instead he kept it, and he won the Nobel Prize. So we have 250 Jews, 2 Muslims, and one of them was Yasser Arafat. So I can understand why there's a lot of anger and resentment for the Jews. I mean, they're remarkable people. And we're finding that now with Tlaib and Omar in Congress, and their stances on the Jews in Israel. It's really frightening.
Yeah, and one of the things that keeps popping out of all this, this anti-humanist attitude, is that all these people believe that there's nothing exceptional about the human being, about the human spirit. And this comes from, again, getting away from the Christian, getting away from a religious understanding of humanity, and getting back the idea that we're nothing more than lice on the planet, because that's the secular humanism that backs communism. And that's the important thing that we need to point out to the young people, is that there will be no real life under this communist, secular, humanist thing unless it's controlled by them. And God doesn't want that. God and Jesus Christ want us to be free. And that's the difference, the very kernel of essence of what the secular humanist movement is all about, what communism is all about. And frankly, that's why they attack so viciously against really solidly Christian or Judeo-Christian groups.
One of the things that impressed me big time, in pre-World War II Germany, Hitler told the Christian pastors, you take care of their souls, I'll take care of everything else. And we saw what happened. The Christian pastors, just with few exceptions, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a great hero of the Christian faith, was hanged by Hitler. But America's pastors are so afraid to engage into the political and cultural war that they've become irrelevant. And if 1 million babies would be saved by most Christian pastors in America, if they would just say, vote pro-life, you can look and see who's pro-life and who isn't. Usually it's the Republican that's pro-life, but if they just said, vote pro-life, and it would save 1 million babies tomorrow, they would not do it. They would not say it. They wouldn't want to dirty themselves by getting involved in politics, even though the politicians of Jesus' day, when he walked on earth as a man, were the Pharisees. I mean, the temple tax, all the things that they did to the Jews to make their lives miserable, keeping them under their thumb. Jesus had a whole lot to say to them and against them, and yet our pastors won't follow in the footsteps of Christ. They're afraid to say anything. I mean, they're just, until the pastors in America lose their gutlessness, I don't see this problem ever being resolved. The Christians are not going to mobilize and save this country without leadership in the church, and they're not getting it.
Yeah, you're right about that, and that was something that Lyndon Johnson put into place, was a 501c3 tax exemption for the church, and of course they use that as leverage to say that there's got to be a total separation of politics from religion, and if they can cherry pick, they can pick and choose who they want to target and take away their tax exemption. But the fact is, that's a sad statement for the Christian church, that truth is less important than a tax exemption.
Well, I don't know of a church yet that's lost its tax exemption.
Right. No, you're right.
I'd like to comment.
It sounds like we got a break coming up, gentlemen, but we'll pick it up on the other side of that break. And this is fascinating. I'm sure that everything you gentlemen have to say is really ringing true to our to our audience.
Serving the planet. The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Hampel, and today my guests on the radio program are George Kaler and also Patrick Matriciana. We are having a fascinating discussion about really how important it is to reach out to our young people, and I really want to dedicate this last half hour to talking about ways that we can do that we can reach the young people, that we can tell them how important it is that they hear the message of freedom, and how we point out the pimples on the left, the fact that they are so radical, so heartless, and so anti-human, and really let people know how important that is, that they understand that under their system, our lives will be completely different and not in a very positive way. And we can use humor to do that. Before we get into the second discussion here of that, I do want to mention to our listeners how important it is that you support this radio network, that you support programs like ours, because we are really the voice of freedom in the world, and without your support we can't continue to do these sorts of programs. So please buy our sponsors' products, support our network and support our radio programs, and really put some effort behind this. Put your money where your mouth is, because without your help, we can't continue to do the kind of programming that we do. So with that, George, I want to get back with you, and I want to get back with Patrick on this as well, but how we can reach out to the young people. What's the best way to let them know what the message of freedom is, and how it can be a difference in their lives?
May I go first? One of the ways, I believe, is buying books like Surviving Georgie. And it just struck me, can your listeners email you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, here's an offer. You can see the time signatures on people who email you. The first 5 who email you requesting a free copy of Surviving Georgie, if you'll send me their address and their names, and I will send them a free personally autographed book of the Surviving Georgie, no cost whatsoever. I'll pay shipping, I'll pay for the book, and otherwise they can give it on Amazon for around, I think, $17. And but first 5 that email you get it for free, autographed as well.
Oh, that's wonderful! What a great offer! I hope our listeners and what an important offer that is, because frankly, your signature on it makes it worth about triple what you would we'd have to pay if you bought it from Amazon.
Well, and think about it. You know, I'm 75. When I'm dead, there won't be any more autographs, so that autograph could become really valuable. I have a number of Pearl S. Buck first editions autographed by the author herself. She used to live in my house, and in Lynchburg. And in fact, Patrick, when he comes to Lynchburg, he stays in the Pearl Buck room. And it's a big old house, has a lot of rooms, but there's the Pearl Buck room. And so she's gone. The books are very valuable because there's no more. Can't be ever anymore. So, yes, first 5 people that email you are going to get personally autographed copies from me. And so books like Surviving Georgie, showing kids the way things were, the way things ought to be, perhaps the way things can be, if kids are willing to fight and work to make them that way again. The one-room school that I went to, one of the most distinct things about it, we turned our house into a bed and breakfast for a while after our kids left. because it's about 6,000 square feet and just 2 people. So it became a bed and breakfast. We had a family from Colorado, and the young man was at the Columbine High School when the shootings took place. And I asked him, I said, the newspapers and TV are blaming guns. He said, guns? They're just inanimate objects. He said, do you blame guns? And I said, well, let me tell you about my childhood. When I went to school, we actually carried our guns to school. He said, what? I said, yeah, you can look at the old yearbooks, the Marksman Club, the Shooting Club, whatever. You can see boys, guns in school. And decades went by without an incident. He said, were kids that much better back then? I said, well, kids are kids. But every day we started off with the Lord's Prayer and a Bible study. He said, was that a Catholic school or some kind of a Christian school? I said, no. That was public school. He said, who let that go? How did we lose that? And I said, Christians lost it. They didn't fight. They won't fight. And so it's all gone. And now we have what Columbine. Yeah, we have a control on prayer. We have a control supposedly on guns, but no. Guns were brought in, kids were killed. And so the book Surviving Georgie, by the way, it's on Amazon. It's got all 5-star reviews so far. And the local bookstores say double your money back if it's not one of the best books you've ever written. Now, I haven't had any occasion to pay any money back, but books like that to show kids the way the things could be again if they're willing to work for them to win back what our generation lost.
And George, this is exactly how we need to approach our kids. Same thing. I used to carry my .22 to school. We had rifle club in the basement of the gymnasium, and we learned proper firearms use and practice and safety. And all these things are being lost because we're moving more and more into a control grid type society. And they need to understand how important it is to go back to some of those important freedoms. And, it hasn't been a slow process to take away all our rights. They've done it over a long period of time, literally, 200 years. But at the same time, it's not going to be an easy process to win those rights back, but we need to start, and we need to start now. And it's important that these young people realize how central their part in that process is going to be.
It's their world to win back or to lose. And but we need to equip them. The public schools, I don't know if you know much about John Dewey. He was an atheist and a socialist. And in his own hand, he wrote a mission statement for the product of public schools: atheism, socialism. So in the public schools, we can't expect them, they're already so far behind behind the 8 ball. They're not going to be able to accomplish this. It has to be accomplished in the Christian school, in the home school, and in the home, because public schools, they're just not going to get it. They're going to teach humanism. They're going to teach evolution, which there's no scientific basis for whatsoever. And they're not going to get any help in the public schools. So where does that leave it? With parents who care about their kids and their grandkids.
Well, you brought up a really important point earlier in the discussion, and that is that you remember back as far as when you were 2 or 3 years old and have clear memories of that. And the difference between your experience, and I had a very similar one, is that our parents tried to communicate to us early, and we learned how to read, we learned how to do things at an early age. And if you don't have language skills and your parents just plunk you in front of a TV and don't try to teach you or spend a lot of personal time with you, you're not going to have the same level of intelligence and understanding as a kid who gets a lot of personal attention by their parents. And I'm not talking spoiling kids and buying them candy and all this nonsense. I'm talking about spending time with your kids, reading to your kids, being part of lives and not being just the breadwinner and putting them in government schools as babysitters and this sort of thing. We need to be more involved in our kids' lives, and as grandparents, I think that's important too.
Well, we're mentors, and they are our protégés. I'm wearing a watch right now. It's a very expensive watch, and on the back of the watch it says, "With much love for our mentor from your protégés." And if that was in business, I'm a financial planner and a money manager. That's how I make my money. And I'm not an author for a living. Otherwise, I'd be starving by now. Surviving Georgie's been a money pit so far, but it's beginning to see the light of day financially. But all of us, we're all mentors, and our kids and grandkids are our protégés. What are we doing with them? And as you just said, we're not spending the time. We're not making a difference in their lives, but their fellow children are, their schools are, but especially social media, television, movies, which is so negative. All the kids are getting mostly is just negativity. What's it going to do to them?
No, that's right. Patrick, I want to get you into this discussion because you have an important role in this as a movie producer, as a film producer. You have really a media, a tool, and I think with George and with some of the valuable resources of people that you have at your disposal, you could create something that would be funny, would be interesting and appeal to the young people. And I think it's really important that we point out the differences between people who believe in humans and understand in the whole human exceptionalism thing and how important human life is, and contrast that with the people who see humans as being nothing more than one more species.
Absolutely. I think you hit on the key to this, and the basic unit in America is the family. And when the family deteriorates, the nation deteriorates. And I will say that while my kids did go to school, they got their schooling from home 90%. They were homeschooled. And my 11-year-old son entered college because he passed the college examinations, and he also passed the California high school equivalency when he was 11 years old. And that's because we taught him stuff at home that really mattered. The thing that's interesting about it, only 40% of the seniors, the graduating seniors in the state of California, can actually pass the high school equivalency test. So spending time with your kids and reading to your kids and incorporating basic Christian values in their lives is the weapon that will last the longest, and that's the one that we have to use, and that's the thing that we all three agree on. Now, I would like to give a bit of a commercial, because education can be spread in many, many different ways. Through books, through the radio. What you're doing is a wonderful thing. And also through films and videos. But today, people are more interested in shorter things, like 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So what we've done basically is we've created full-length feature film length documentaries, and we've done smaller films. The smaller films can be handled, and all of that can be gotten through the web, through our website and through our 800 number. And I'd like to give that, if that's possible. But before I do, with your permission, I would like people to be able to track what's going on with George, because George has so many things going on his website. He has a 1-minute show every day, and you can find all of this if you go to survivinggeorgie.com. That's it, survivinggeorgie.com, and you will be able to open up a whole lot of resources. In this 1 minute that George does every day, Tea Time with George, is very, very powerful, because George is so insightful in so many ways. This is something you can do. So if I could say it again, survivinggeorge.com. Is that right, George? Do I have it all right?
Well, the book is at survivinggeorgie.com, and there's some great interviews with radio and TV people on there. And then for the Tea Time radio stuff, I do a 1 minute. I'm not a big professional like you, Dan, but I do a 1 minute constitutional Judeo-Christian cultural message every day, and it's called Tea Time. And you can go to thousands of people get it online. They just go to teawithgeorge.com, teawithgeorge.com. And my dad, who lived to be 100 years old, when the maid would bring in the laptop and he got it by email because it wasn't in his radio area, he'd push the button and hear a 1 minute message from his son Georgie, and it really made a difference to him. And it felt like he was with me every day, a minute a day, teawithgeorge.com.
Well, I'll tell you what, you guys are fascinating, and I'm going to start listening every day, George, to your Tea with George. I really have to say I'm fascinated, and incidentally, I am not a professional radio personality. As a matter of fact, I just started this process 3 years ago, and I did it on a fluke. I was a former county commissioner, and I had someone approach me and ask me if I would fill in for them on a radio program, and that's kind of how I got started. But I have to tell you, George, I can't tell you how much I look forward to a continual friendship with you. You're a terrific gentleman, and everything that you've brought to this show is 100% on board or online with everything that I think too. And I'm absolutely thrilled that Patrick introduced you. And I'm thrilled, Patrick, that you're continuing to be involved in the ways that you are. So let's talk about Jeremiah Films a little bit while we've got the time to do it.
Well, you know, there are a lot of ails in the world, and we need to have information that teaches us something. Let's just take evolution, the theory of evolution, okay? Now, I did a movie some years ago called The Evolution Conspiracy, and I traveled all over the world. I went to Darwin's home, and I had the whole home all to myself with the caretaker. And as we walked through the home, he says, I'm going to show you something that I never take out of the cabinet. And he took out this book, and the book was by Karl Marx. It was Das Kapital. It was autographed by Karl Marx to Charles Darwin. And Marx was a great fan of Darwin because Darwin gave Marx what he needed in building his philosophy, because they got rid of God through evolution. And the politics behind evolution is Marxism. And that's what it is. And in our film, we show this. And there, of course, there's more information today out on the bogusness of evolution. It's just unbelievable. Anyway, we have lots of different books of films that we've made over the years. And I would like you to go to, I'll give you the 800 number. It's jeremiahfilms.com. It's www.jeremiahfilms.com. And we'll send you a catalog. But if you would like to talk to Joshua, who is my son, who is in charge of Jeremiah Films, and he's the one that's been making some marvelous new videos that are just outstanding. He's a much brighter and more clever than his father, but he's very, very good at what he does. And I think that you would find getting a catalog and looking at these things would be very worthwhile, because we've got films that deal with everything, the issue of pro-life. I mean, we've got a series called The Pagan Invasion. Many, many, many films that continue to sell, plus a lot of our political films, which are out there. But I'm gonna, if you've got a pencil, you can write this down. It's jeremiahfilms.com. And if you want to make a phone call, and right now it's 800-828-2290. That's 800-828-2290. That's a Jeremiah Films number that we've had forever. And in fact, I had that number before Joshua was born. And so it's been around for a while. The other thing that I would like to say, and that is that to understand what George is doing, he's given you his information. But also, there is a phone number that George has if somebody would like to book him on a talk show, or if you know anybody that would like to, perhaps if George is in town somewhere, you'd like to have him at your church or for your group. We can also do that with George, and so that's something that you can get through going through the website with George, and any one of those, I think you can get them. Is that right, George? Can you want to complete that?
I'm not sure. I just at Patrick's request as my advisor, I just got a new phone on that, and I don't even know what the phone number is. I forgot it. It's brand new. What is it, Patrick? Do you know the phone number?
Well, I can look it up in a minute, but at any rate, you can get that phone by going to your website, and that would be survivinggeorgie.com, and that's your website that has everything on it.
The phone number is there.
Yeah, the phone number is there.
And they can always email me if they wish.
Right.
George, I wanted to find out if is it okay if we give out your email address, the George at email address?
Yeah, George at ontherightside.com. On the right side. And I've had that email since I was writing weekly columns about 20 years ago. And so I just kept it. It's kind of a play on words. I'm on the right side. If you don't agree with me, where does that put you? You know, so George at on the right side. And you can go to Amazon and look at Surviving Georgie, and if you want to buy it or not. And the local bookstores, as I said, say double your money back if you don't just love it. And I hope everybody does love it.
Well, I do have your. George, I do have your phone number that you can give out.
Okay, give it to me, please.
So you want to write it down as I give it? It's 434. That's 434-907-2197. Once again, you want to talk to somebody at Surviving Georgie? Becky's the one that'll answer the phone. It's 434-907-2197. And that's primarily to book George on a talk show, or to perhaps book him in a church.
Okay, gentlemen, we've run out of time, but I will have to tell you, I look forward to the next time we get a chance to visit like this, and believe me, it won't be that far down the road. We'll be doing this again with your permission. So I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. I want to remind you that we are here to help you to connect the dots. So join us again next week at this time, and thank our listeners for supporting this radio network and this radio program. Gentlemen, thank you for being our guests today. It's been fantastic.
It's been an honor.
It's been an honor with me. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you.